welcome to my watercolour YouTube channel. I'm Karen Rice. I'm going to be experimenting today with my watercolour painting, testing Daniel Smith's watercolour ground on canvas board and an old watercolour painting. I'm really excited to show you. This is the canvas board, so I've actually put the ground on top of this and painted on top with watercolour, and this is the old watercolour painting. So I painted the Daniel Smith ground on top of this, let it dry, and then painted the watercolour on top, and I'm really excited about it. So you can actually reuse your old paintings. So shall we get started? For a full list of all the materials I'm going to be using in this video, please see the description below. This is the Daniel Smith ground, so I have experimented before but only a little bit, so I'd really like to show you sort of what I've learned so far. It's all very new to me as well. So this is the paper that I'm going to be painting on top of. You can see the old watercolour painting through that, and that's the canvas board that has been primed. I'm using an old acrylic brush. Don't use your best watercolour brushes for this. And this is an old watercolour painting. It's something I was practicing doing birch trees. So just apply the watercolour ground onto a dry surface. Now you can paint this on any surface. It's absolutely brilliant. You can paint it on obviously canvas, paper, wood, glass. Some of the surfaces you may have to rub down, so please see the instructions, but I'm so excited about this. So I'm just very gently painting this ground on. I don't want to disturb the watercolour painting because it'll end up being a browny colour. Remember, watercolour isn't permanent. So you want to leave that on and let it dry for at least a couple of days. So this is the watercolour painting. You can see I needed 2 coats here. So that's my recommendation for darker colours. And here is the gorgeous reference photograph, and a link for that can be found in the description below. For drawing templates, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? For more details, just click the link in the top right hand corner of this video. So I've wet the paper here. This is the watercolour paper because you can see those birch trees coming through, and I'm just using the colours I used in my previous video. I'm using Naples Yellow, Indian Red and Cerulean mostly, and I will chuck another couple of colours in there as well. Remember, this is a very loose sort of painting. I'm just experimenting. It's almost like something you could actually do in your sketchbooks. One thing I do notice straight away is the texture that I've left with the brush that I used, which I really kind of like. The paint's going on really, really nicely, and actually it feels quite dry and porous to the surface, you know, as your brush is going along, but it's actually going on really nicely. So I'm really pleased. I'm just playing around, dropping in these colours here and there. What's really satisfying about this is I'm actually using an old watercolour painting. Even though I could see the birch trees coming through before, they're starting to be disguised now, so I'm quite pleased with that. I was just using my size 6 brush there, putting on some of the Indian Red mixed with the Cerulean, and I'm actually applying with my card. Now, a lot of you might know that I actually do a lot of this in my watercolour painting, and I just wanted to test it out to see what it did. So I'm just sort of putting literally paint from my palette, quite creamy paint, and just applying it and messing around with it, really just experimenting. There's something very freeing up when you can actually experiment like this on an old piece of watercolour painting. So I'm just putting some more darker shades on here. There is a little bit of indigo in here because I found, because this is a second sort of layer, it seemed to get absorbed a little bit, and it sort of looked a little bit dull. So I'm actually putting really strong colour on, and I've let the underpainting dry, and I'm actually putting another layer on the foreground, just really building up with the Cerulean and the Indian Red watered down, just to see what happens. But again, you can see that lovely texture in the foreground there. I'm putting a slightly darker blue sort of sea in there, dropping in some water, using my size 6 brush. The underpainting has dried, but what I do find, there's a little bit of a bleed, and it will start to happen on the horizon. It's just something maybe I didn't dry my painting for long enough. I did give it a good blow dry, but it may have still been damp because I'm actually got this taped to a foam board, so it may be still a little bit damp underneath. It's something I'm going to keep an eye on. I'm just putting a little bit more cerulean in the sky now, sort of a bit damp into damp and a little bit wet on dry here and there, just playing around, seeing what it's like with a second coat, and just putting some smaller sort of marks in the sky to create some depth. I'm putting in some people now. I'm using my size 2 brush. Everything has dried, and these are the Cerulean mixed with a little bit of the Indian Red. And if you want to know about painting people and how to paint them, I'll put a little bit of a link in the description below. But as you can see there, just putting in sort of very sort of basic sort of shades, very neutral colours, bit of a cast shadow. I know it's not in the photograph. I thought a nice little doggy would be quite nice in there as well. And I'm putting a tiny little bit more sort of detail on the horizon to make it look almost like there were distant trees with that bleed. I'm layering some sort of just very dark paint, glazing it onto this sort of these rocks on the left here, and then pulling off some light, just experimenting, as I said earlier, and swishing on a little bit more paint on the foreground, just to really put this sort of this watercolour ground through its paces, a little bit more dark on the shore edge there, just dropping in water. I love the colours that these sort of 3 paints make. They're gorgeous. I've just dropped a little bit of Indian Red in there, damp into damp, with my size 10 brush. I'm really having a lot of fun here experimenting, and I've decided I'm going to turn this to the side and I'm going to use a little bit of my spray bottle, because I do that again in my watercolour painting, and again I want to see what it's like using the spray bottle. So I'm really putting everything through its paces here. So it's actually quite soft and diffuse, so I quite like the effect using the spray bottle. I've removed the framing tape there, and there has been a bleed underneath the tape as well, so that's quite interesting. Again, I'm going to keep my eye on it and test it out on future paintings. I'm just giving my painting a bit of a spatter with the leftovers in the palette here, just to create a bit of texture in this left-hand corner. And I'm putting around sort of 2 L-shaped mount boards just to have a look at it, with a frame round it. And I'm really pleased with it. It's so soft and the colours are so beautiful. Here's a close-up now, and you can see it's got textures. Besides the bleeds, I'm really pleased with it. So let's try the canvas board. Here I've drawn out a very simple outline drawing. The canvas board measures 6 by 8 inches. I'm using my size 10 brush here. So it's already primed with acrylic primer, and now I've actually put the Daniel Smith watercolour ground on there. So it's quite interesting. So it's had double primer in a way. So I'm applying some of the same colours I used previously, the Cerulean, the Indian Red and the Naples Yellow. And I'm just painting these wet on wet. It has got a different feel to the paper. It doesn't feel as porous, and it's actually, I really like it. There's a real lovely glow coming from it. It may be because it's almost kind of like had 2 coats, whereas I may have needed to put another coat on the watercolour painting because the other underpainting was showing through. So I'm really going to experiment with this. I'm so excited. So I'm painting this beach area wet on dry, just using really the Cerulean, the Indian Red, touch of yellow ochre, and just really letting go, experimenting. Try to leave a little bit of white edge on the shoreline there, and as you can see, I did the same in the sky. I left a big white bank of clouds up there, and that was sort of a hard edge, so it was a dry area. I'm painting the rocks there, filling in, using my size 6 brush, using the Indian Red with the Naples Yellow or whatever's in your palette. And the painting has actually dried now, so I'm painting this wet on dry, and again I can see a little bleed, so I'm just thinking to myself, does it need to dry more? Do I need to wait a bit longer? Because I had blow dried it, it might just need a bit longer. Again, I'm going to be experimenting with that, and I will let you know how I get on. I'm just adding a little bit of the indigo, a little bit of the Indian Red, touch of ultramarine. It's all going in here now. I'm getting really sort of carried away with my palette there with all the paints and things, and just sort of really just dropping in colours and just seeing what happens. just using the plastic card again, just to take the, you know, sort of create some nice effects with the rocks there. And that seems to be responding quite well. That paint's quite creamy that's on there as well. So I'm just pulling it off to create some textures. So I'm quite pleased with that. It's really, really got a nice effect. Again, I'm just putting another coat on the beach in the foreground area just to make it a little bit darker, and I'm using the Indian red, tiny touch of the Naples yellow and a little bit of the cerulean, just really mixing up and getting some really nice colours, and using my size 2 brush here, painting the shoreline with a sort of a greyish colour, and that headland there to the left, a little bit on the horizon, just little bits of details here and there, some marks in the sea. And I'm just sort of softening that edge there. It dried quite quickly. I'm really getting used to this. This watercolour ground is quite different, so I'm finding it quite fascinating, and definitely inspires me to want to do some more. I'm just painting some people along the shoreline here, and it is slightly bleeding out. You may not be able to see that enough. It's just ballooning a little tiny bit. So again, I will experiment and get back to you and give you my findings, and putting a few little rocks here and there. And I'm painting these people again in the foreground. It's quite useful actually to do the same painting twice. It's quite freeing up, and you kind of, you know, you've seen it, so you're quite, you know, you're kind of familiar with the scene and you've practiced it, so it builds up more confidence. I definitely recommend doing this lovely little scene in your sketchbooks, or even make it a bigger watercolour painting. And if you have any watercolour ground, to experiment with it. I'm just doing this little group that are on the beach. I didn't actually do it in the other one, but they're sitting down, and I'm just using the sort of Indian red with the cerulean quite greyed down with my size 2 brush. Wet on dry. I'm just painting another sort of thin wash, a glaze in the foreground there and around the rocks area with the cerulean, the Indian red, just softening there on the shoreline, another glaze on the rocks, and finally, of course, a spatter. I didn't really like my spatter, so I've just actually put another glaze over the top. As you can see there, the paint has bled through on the canvas as well. Again, it's something I'm going to look out for. I put a little L shape around the little canvas painting as well, and I'm delighted with it. I'm more pleased with this one actually than I was with the watercolour paper. So I'm quite excited about being able to paint on canvas, and I'm definitely going to be experimenting with this more. And I really encourage you to have a go at painting this little scene. I hope it's inspired you. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. If you have any comments, please put them in the comment section below. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you'll get updates of my latest videos. Thanks again for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.